You're here, maybe drawn by curiosity, maybe because the word empath sparked something deep inside you. But let's be clear, this isn't about warm fuzzies or surface-level sensitivity. We're diving into something ancient, something raw, something that hums beneath the skin of what most call feeling too much. When I talk about empaths, I'm not picturing a soft-hearted soul who just gets other people's emotions. No, I'm talking about a conduit, a lightning rod for the world's unspoken chaos, a vessel for energies most don't even know they're carrying. And trust me, that's not always a gift. It's a weight. The world loves to romanticize empaths. You've seen it, social media posts painting them as angelic, hypersensitive beings who soak up everyone's pain like it's their sacred duty. But here's the thing, when something's made that digestible, it's usually been stripped of its truth. The empath, as I've come to understand through dreams, study, and raw experience, isn't some spiritual poster child. They're a carrier of shadows, often ones that don't belong to them. And most of the time, they don't even realize what's hit them. To get this, we've got to go deeper than psychology or self-help buzzwords. An empath isn't just tuned in to others' emotions. They're wide open to the archetypal currents, the invisible forces that drive people without them knowing. Picture an old-world healer, crouched in a field, shaking with fever not because they're sick, but because the land itself is crying out. That's the empath. They feel what's not theirs to hold. They transmute energies they didn't choose. And if they don't wake up to this role, it can swallow them whole. I once had a dream, years before I could name these patterns. A figure stood on a cliff, arms outstretched, trembling like they were caught between reaching out and pushing something away. Below them, a void roared with voices, grief, rage, longing, all tangled together. The figure couldn't see the source, but their body shook with every sound, as if each cry carved a wound. That figure was the empath, blind to the root of their pain, unable to tell where they ended and the world began. They were a sponge, soaking up everything, with no one to teach them how to wring themselves out. There's a real danger in being this open without knowing how to protect yourself. The unconscious doesn't play by moral rules, it's a wild, sacred mess. When an empath lets in someone else's psychic baggage, whether on purpose or by accident, they're inviting in the raw, unprocessed shadows most people shove down deep. And let's be honest, most folks are walking around with shadows they've never faced, fears they've never named, wounds they've buried under distraction or denial. Those shadows don't just sit there. They look for an outlet. And an unguarded empath? They become the perfect host. I came across a story in my studies, from a tribal tradition in Africa. A young dreamer wandered the forest's edge, hearing cries no one else could. Not words, but waves of feeling, grief, terror, yearning. They'd weep without reason, tremble in silence, laugh when nothing was funny. The tribe thought they were possessed. But the elder didn't banish spirits. Instead, they taught the dreamer to name what they felt, to speak to it. That's the key. An empath who doesn't discern what they're carrying becomes a playground for the world's unclaimed pain. But an empath who names it? They step into the role of the alchemist, turning chaos into clarity. Empathy isn't just feeling, it's a psychic act. And without awareness, it's a slow possession. The unconscious is sneaky. It doesn't always show up as something scary. Sometimes it dresses as compassion so intense it drowns you. Sometimes it's a need to fix others that burns you out. Sometimes it's love for someone whose shadow has hooked into your soul, mistaking you for a dumping ground. I've seen empaths fall for people who drain them, not out of weakness, but because they're seduced by the other's wounds. They feel the pain and think, I can save them. But that's where the darkness begins. Empathy can pull you into a dance you didn't choose, a kind of psychic entanglement that feels like love but often isn't. When an empath feels someone's pain, they don't just notice it, they take it on, sometimes without realizing. And that's where things get murky. I've seen empaths drawn to the broken, the chaotic, the ones whose shadows scream the loudest. Not because they're naive, but because their gift makes them a magnet for unhealed wounds. They sense the ache in another and mistake it for a call to rescue. But here's the truth, not every wound wants healing. Some just want a host. And the empath, if they're not careful, becomes that host. This dynamic has a name in the world of archetypes, in antiodromia, the swing into the opposite. The healer becomes the harmed. The one who carries light ends up cradling someone else's darkness. The empath starts out wanting to help, but over time, they lose the thread of who they are. Their boundaries blur, their energy drains, and they start to feel like they're dissolving. I've worked with people who couldn't tell where their emotions stopped and someone else's began. They'd cry for no reason, rage without cause, or feel a heavy sadness that wasn't theirs. They were carrying psychic cargo they didn't even know they'd picked up. Your gift as an empath isn't just emotional, it's archetypal. You're not just picking up on someone's bad day. You're tapping into their lineage, their buried dreams, the gods they've forgotten, the lives they never lived. When someone walks into your space, you don't just feel their mood, you sense the weight of their entire story. And if you haven't done the work to know your own story, to face your own shadows, that weight will crush you. The spiritual world loves to glorify sensitivity, to call it a superpower. But let's not kid ourselves, every gift has a shadow side, and empathy's shadow is heavy. Take anger, for example. When someone buries their rage for years, it doesn't vanish. It festers, waiting in the psychic field like a spark looking for kindling. If that person crosses paths with an empath, especially one who hasn't faced their own anger, that rage can jump. It's like fire catching dry wood. Suddenly, the empath feels irritable, restless, or even sick, not knowing they're carrying a flame that isn't theirs. I once knew a man who'd get migraines every time he visited his family. He thought it was stress. But as we dug deeper, it became clear, he was absorbing his father's unspoken fury, a rage the old man had buried decades ago. The empath was the outlet. There's a dream I often think of, one a client shared. She stood in a house with endless rooms, each filled with people she knew. But their faces were wrong, twisted, hollow, like masks. They reached for her, hands grabbing, voices pleading. She tried to help, but every touch left her weaker, her skin paler. She woke up gasping, feeling like she'd been drained. That dream wasn't just a nightmare, it was a warning. Her empathy had turned her into a psychic landfill, a place where others dumped their unprocessed pain. And she had no tools to stop it. If you're an empath, you've got to understand, your openness is sacred, but it needs structure. Without it, you're like a cup with no bottom, everything pours through, leaving you empty. I heard a story from a Native American elder about a woman who could feel the sorrow of her tribe. She'd sit by the river, weeping for losses she hadn't lived. The elders didn't tell her to toughen up. They taught her to build a fire, to offer the feelings back to the earth, to say, "This isn't mine to carry." That's the lesson. You can feel deeply, but you don't have to hold it all. The unconscious is a trickster. It'll make you think your empathy is your purpose, that you're meant to save everyone. But that's a trap. I've seen empaths lose themselves in relationships, pouring their soul into partners who couldn't reciprocate. They'd say, "I love them," but what they meant was, "I feel their pain, and I can't let go." That's not love, it's a psychic contract, one where the empath agrees to carry what the other won't face. And the longer it goes on, the more the empath fades, their own dreams and desires buried under someone else's shadow. Empathy, when it's unconscious, can turn you into a mirror for everyone else's pain, reflecting their shadows while your own face fades. You become so attuned to others that you forget what your own voice sounds like. But here's the thing, being an empath isn't about losing yourself, it's about learning to hold space without collapsing into it. The danger isn't in feeling too much, it's in not knowing where you end and the world begins. And that's where the real work starts, not in saving others, but in claiming yourself. I once worked with a woman who'd cry the moment she sat down to talk. She thought she was broken, carrying wounds from her past, parents, lovers, betrayals. And sure, she had scars, but as we peeled back the layers, something else emerged. Her tears weren't just hers. She was weeping for her mother's unspoken grief, her grandmother's silenced dreams, a whole lineage of women who'd been taught to swallow their pain. She'd become the vessel for their uncried tears, and in doing so, she'd lost the words for her own story. That's what happens when an empath doesn't draw the line between what's theirs and what's not. They drown in a sea of inherited ghosts. If you're an empath, your gift demands boundaries, not as walls to keep the world out, but as a frame to hold your own soul intact. Without them, you're like a house with no doors. Anyone's pain can walk right in and make itself at home. There's a dream I often recall, one that feels like a map for this. A man wandered a city of mirrors, each one showing a different face, a crying child, a raging warrior, a grieving elder. He kept asking, which one is me, but the mirrors stayed silent. That's the empath's struggle, lost in the reflections of others' inner worlds, unable to find their own reflection. The path out isn't about shutting down your sensitivity, it's about confronting yourself. Have you ever asked what parts of you lean into empathy to feel needed, to feel important? There's a shadow motive here, one we don't like to admit. Sometimes, being the one who gets someone's pain feels good, like a quiet power. Sometimes, carrying others' burdens is easier than facing your own silence. I've seen empaths who'd rather soak up a room's chaos than sit alone with their own thoughts. We're tricky creatures, we can dress our avoidance in compassion, and the unconscious loves to play along. To be an empath with clarity, you've got to do the inner work. That means descending into your own underworld, meeting the parts of you that hide behind your gift. Have you faced the anger you've buried to stay kind? The grief you've ignored to stay strong? The fear that if you stop feeling for others, you'll be alone? These aren't weaknesses, they're the raw material of your soul. And until you face them, you'll keep attracting people who mirror those unclaimed pieces, pulling you into their storms. There's a story from myth that comes to mind, Chiron, the wounded healer. He was a centaur, wise and kind, but forever marked by a wound that wouldn't heal. He didn't let it define him, though, he used it to guide others. That's the empath's potential, not to stay wounded, but to transform their sensitivity into wisdom. But here's the catch, if you don't face your own wounds, you'll end up like Chiron's shadow, believing your purpose is to suffer for others. That's not a gift, it's a trap, an archetypal possession where your identity gets tangled in pain that isn't yours. Empathy isn't about absorbing, it's about witnessing. It's saying, I see your pain, but I don't take it as my own. It's offering presence without losing yourself. I once heard of a healer in an ancient tribe who'd sit with the sick, feeling their pain but never keeping it. After each session, they'd walk to a river, cup their hands, and whisper, "This belongs to you," letting the water carry it away. That's the kind of ritual empaths need, not to harden their hearts, but to release what they've carried. The unconscious is relentless. It'll tempt you to think your empathy makes you a savior, that you're meant to fix the world's brokenness. But that's a lie. Your job isn't to carry everyone else's shadows, it's to carry yourself with enough strength that others remember how to carry their own. And that starts with knowing your own edges, your own limits, your own truth. Only then can you step out of the mirrors and see your own face. The empath's journey isn't about closing off their heart, it's about crafting a vessel strong enough to hold what flows through it. Without boundaries, empathy becomes a flood, washing away your sense of self. But boundaries aren't cold walls or a refusal to care. They're a sacred membrane, porous yet firm, letting you feel without fusing, witness without absorbing. This is where the empath transforms from a sponge into an alchemist, turning raw emotion into wisdom without drowning in it. I once worked with a young man who described himself as an empath, but he was exhausted, like his soul was fraying at the edges. He'd walk into a room and feel a weight settle on his chest, someone's anger, someone's grief, someone's unspoken fear. He thought it was his job to carry it, to ease the room's tension. But he was fading, his own dreams slipping away as he became a silent caretaker for everyone else's pain. He shared a dream that stuck with me. He stood in a river, water rushing around him, carrying debris, broken branches, rusted metal, bones. He tried to hold it all, but the current was too strong, and he was sinking. That dream was his psyche screaming for boundaries, for a way to let the river flow without being swept away. The unconscious loves to blur lines. It'll trick you into thinking that feeling someone's pain means you have to fix it, that love means merging, that compassion means sacrifice. But that's where empaths get lost. I've seen it in relationships, empaths drawn to people who radiate chaos, not because they're weak, but because their sensitivity picks up on the other's wounds like a beacon. They think, I can help them, but too often, they end up carrying the other's shadow, losing their own light in the process. It's not love, it's entanglement, a psychic knot that binds you to someone else's pain. There's a story from an old Celtic tradition about a seer who could feel the sorrows of her village. She'd sit by a fire each night, naming what she felt, grief for a lost child, rage for a betrayed trust, and then she'd cast a stone into the flames for each one, saying, "This is not mine." That ritual kept her whole. It's a lesson for empaths: you can feel deeply, but you don't have to keep it. You can witness without owning. That's what boundaries do, they let you say, I see you, but I am not you. This isn't about shutting people out or hardening your heart. It's about rooting yourself so deeply in your own truth that you can stand in someone's storm without becoming it. I once knew a woman who'd feel physically ill after talking to certain friends. She thought it was her fault, her sensitivity. But as we worked together, she realized she was absorbing their anxiety, their unprocessed trauma. She learned to pause before engaging, to ask herself, is this mine? If it wasn't, she'd imagine a clear shield around her, not to block connection, but to filter what didn't belong. Over time, she stopped getting sick. Her empathy didn't dim, it got clearer. The unconscious is a master of disguise. Sometimes it wraps empathy in nobility, making you feel like it's your duty to carry the world's pain. Other times, it sneaks in as a need to be needed, a quiet pride in being the one who understands. But there's a shadow motive here. Sometimes, empaths lean into others' pain to avoid their own. It's easier to fix someone else's chaos than to face the silence of your own wounds. I've seen empaths who'd rather sit in a room full of turmoil than spend an hour alone with their thoughts. That's not compassion, it's avoidance dressed up as virtue. To break this cycle, you've got to face your own underworld. What parts of you crave the role of savior? What parts fear being alone if you stop carrying others' pain? These questions aren't easy, but they're the crucible where the empath becomes whole. It's not about feeling less, it's about feeling with purpose. It's about learning to say, I'll hold space for you, but I won't hold your shadows. It's about standing in the fire of someone's pain and not burning up, because you've built a vessel strong enough to hold your own flame. The empath's path isn't about dimming their sensitivity, it's about stepping into their power, becoming what I call the initiated empath. This is someone who's walked through the fire of their own psyche, faced their shadows, and emerged not as a martyr but as a mystic. They don't absorb the world's pain, they witness it, transforming it through presence, not possession. But getting there requires a descent, a confrontation with the parts of you that hide behind your gift, and a willingness to let go of the stories that keep you tethered to suffering. I once worked with an artist, a woman so attuned to the world's rhythms that she could feel joy or sorrow in a stranger's glance. But it was killing her. She'd paint through nights, haunted by feelings she couldn't name. She brought me a dream. She wandered a graveyard where every tombstone bore her name, yet the graves held others' bones. She'd wake up exhausted, like she'd been digging all night. That dream wasn't random, it was her psyche showing her she'd become a burial ground for others' pain. Her empathy was holy, but it lacked discernment. She needed to learn which ghosts to honor and which to release. The initiated empath knows their gift isn't just feeling, it's alchemy. They don't take on suffering, they hold space for it to transform. But this only happens when you've done the inner work. You've got to ask, why do I feel compelled to fix others? What part of me believes love means bleeding for someone else? Often, these patterns start early. I've seen empaths whose sensitivity was born in childhood, scanning a parent's mood to keep the peace or soothing a sibling's pain to feel safe. That hypervigilance became their gift, but it's rooted in survival, not grace. Until you face that root, your empathy will always carry a hidden cost. There's a myth that comes to mind, Orpheus, who ventured into the underworld to retrieve his love. He didn't just barge in, he sang, charming even the shadows. That's the empath's task, to enter the dark, not to get lost, but to bring something back: wisdom, clarity, strength. You do this by meeting your own pain, your own fears, the parts of you that merge with others to avoid being alone. It's terrifying work. I've had clients weep when they realized their empathy was partly a shield, a way to feel needed so they'd never be abandoned. But that realization is freedom. It lets you choose how to feel, not just react. The unconscious is a trickster, always ready to pull you back into old patterns. It'll tempt you with the savior archetype, whispering that you're meant to carry the world. Or it'll dress up as the martyr, making you think suffering is your purpose. These are traps. The initiated empath sees through them. They pause when they feel a pull to help, asking, "Is this mine? Am I healing or fusing?" They don't rush to soothe someone's pain, they trust the other's psyche to find its way. Sometimes, pain is a teacher, not an enemy. I recall a man who'd feel elated when others leaned on him, like his empathy made him holy. But he was drained, his own life shrinking as he played rescuer. In a dream, he stood on a stage, performing for a crowd that kept growing, their hands clawing at him. He woke up panicked, realizing he'd turned his gift into a role. That's the danger: empathy can become performance, a way to prove your worth. The initiated empath steps off the stage. They don't need to be needed, they need to be whole. This shift changes everything, especially relationships. Unconscious empaths gravitate toward the wounded, thinking they can fix them. But the initiated empath seeks clarity, not chaos. They choose connections rooted in truth, not trauma. If loneliness comes, they don't fill it with broken souls, they sit with it, letting it speak. Their gift becomes a mirror, not for pain, but for potential. They don't dim their intuition to keep others comfortable. They say no not to reject, but to protect the sacred within. The empath's true calling isn't to carry the world's pain but to become a living mirror, reflecting not wounds but possibilities. This is the shift from sponge to mystic, from martyr to alchemist. The initiated empath doesn't just feel, they transform. They've walked through their own shadows, faced the parts of themselves that craved the role of savior, and emerged with a spine of integrity. Their empathy becomes a lamp, illuminating without burning, guiding without dragging. But this isn't a destination, it's a lifelong practice, a daily choice to feel with clarity and stay rooted in self. I once worked with a woman who felt everyone's emotions like they were her own. She'd walk into a coffee shop and leave with a headache, carrying the unspoken stress of strangers. She shared a dream that haunted her. She stood in a forest, holding a lantern, surrounded by figures begging for light. She gave it to them, piece by piece, until her lantern dimmed and she was left in darkness. That dream was her psyche's plea. She was giving away her own light, mistaking it for her purpose. The mystic empath doesn't do this. They hold their light steady, offering presence, not sacrifice. This transformation demands vigilance. The unconscious is sly, always ready to pull you back into old roles: the rescuer, the martyr, the one who fixes. I've seen empaths slip into believing they're above pain once they start to understand their gift, turning wisdom into a subtle weapon. This is the shadow of the magician archetype, where empathy becomes manipulation, a way to control by knowing others' wounds. The mystic empath avoids this by staying humble, asking daily, "Am I feeling or fusing?" Am I helping or performing? These questions aren't doubt, they're the guardrails of maturity. Relationships shift profoundly here. The unconscious empath is drawn to chaos, to people who mirror their unhealed wounds. They think love means enduring, that their value lies in how much they can carry. But the mystic empath craves truth over trauma. They seek those who see them, not just need them. They're not afraid of loneliness, they know it's a teacher, not a void to fill. I once knew a man who'd spent years saving others, only to realize he was avoiding his own grief. When he finally faced it, he stopped chasing broken souls. He found peace in connections that didn't demand his light, but shared it. There's a vision that comes to me now, one I've seen in dreams and heard from others. A figure stands by a lake, still and silver, untouched by ripples. Around them, people gaze into the water, searching for answers. The figure doesn't speak, doesn't fix, they simply are. And in their presence, others see not their pain, but their potential, the self they've forgotten. This is the mystic empath's gift, to be a mirror for what's possible, not a sponge for what's broken. They don't absorb suffering, they witness it, letting it move through without claiming it. If this resonates, it's an invitation, not a judgment. Step back from the shadows you've carried for others. Turn inward, face the silence you've avoided, and speak to the parts of you that merge to feel safe. Honor them, thank them, then let them go. You're not a sacrifice or a landfill for the world's pain. You're a threshold, a place where feeling becomes meaning, where empathy becomes wisdom. This isn't about feeling less, it's about feeling true. To live this way is to sanctify your sensitivity. You walk among the world's ghosts without being haunted. You witness pain without performing penance. You love without losing yourself. And in doing so, you become what the archetypes have always pointed to, the union of heart and spine, the open hand and the grounded root. You don't carry the world, you remind it how to carry itself. Your empathy, once a weight, becomes a fire, not consuming but illuminating, not destroying but revealing. And in that light, you return to yourself, not as a rescuer, but as a soul.